Wow. Welcome, everyone. You should have Facebook this. Bring your posse or these all your friends?
I think they all look familiar.
My name is Mark England. This is my wife Elizabeth. This is our home. Welcome. I'm so glad you came. Especially newcomers who are here for the first time. We're going to get started right away. Tiffany, where are you? Tiffany's ready. There you are. Tiffany's going to be giving our opening prayer, and then we're going to get started.
Dear Father in heaven, we're thankful that we can gather today, and so thankful for Brother Richard and Sister Claudia for coming to join our little community here. And we're thankful for the hospitality of the Englands, and we're thankful for Jay and Jane, who always organize these events and work with so many to bring great people together. We're thankful for the research and the service and the devoted lives that the Bushmans have given to helping us to learn more about church history and about precious doctrines that we love, and openness to ask questions and to continually search for progress and deeper understanding. We pray, Father, for thy Spirit to be here, that we can all be open to one another, that we can be kind at the same time that we are clear with our questions and with our interests and with our beliefs. And we love thee, and we're grateful for all the blessings that we have been given. And we say this in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. So, Mark, we should say Tiffany started Think Again back in Boston, and Faith Again grew out of Think Again. So we wouldn't be here without Tiffany. Okay, we have a lot to cover this evening, so I'm going to talk quickly. This is Faith Again. We also have a Think Again study group, which is held the third Thursday of every month. Jay, thank you very much for organizing our website and email list. So if you would like to be in our monthly email list so you know what the reading is, what's coming, please give Jay your contact information and he'll get you on the list so you can find it. Faith Again is an outgrowth of Think Again, and its purpose was to hopefully address some of the faith challenge issues that many people of faith have, specifically Mormons. We've been having numerous study groups addressing various issues that usually are leading to faith challenges or faith crises. This is a community here, a support community, to help people on their journeys. We have 3 rules here. Who knows rule number 1?
No bitching or moaning.
What?
No bitching or moaning.
No bitching and moaning. This is not a forum for dumping on the church, okay? We are here to hear your stories, which may be painful ones, and you're welcome to share them. And that's wonderful. But it's not just about building on each other's horrible stories and complaining about what the church does. Okay? We want this to be a growing, learning, hopefully positive experience for all of you. That said, it is also a safe place to share your stories and questions. So if there is something really troubling you, or if you had a painful experience, do not be afraid to share it here. This is what this forum is for. And this is what this community is for, is to support you with your experiences, however painful they may be. Third, what's rule number 3? Have fun. You want to enjoy coming here and feel like you've been fed and that you get the support in community that you may not get in your board or with your families. This is your family here. So we're glad you came. We hope to see you all again. Now, our closing hymn will be True to the Faith, as requested by Claudia. You can look it up in your
Number 254.
254.
Mark will lead us.
Mark will lead us. Okay. And Charlotte, my mother, will be doing the closing prayer. We will be serving gelato afterwards. We do have a dairy-free sorbetto, so if you cannot eat dairy products, we will have these sorbettos that we eat. Okay. Now, usually I have no difficulty getting information from our guests. But gosh. I hate to be your bishop. Claudia was a little bit more cooperative. Her favorite color was red, but she gave all this information quite begrudgingly. Her favorite color is red. Her favorite food is whatever is in front of her. Her favorite vacation spot is New York City. Isn't that where you live? Yeah. Favorite movie, she's just kind of like, well, I guess Casablanca. Everybody loves Casablanca. Her favorite book is Shadow on the Rock by Willa Cather. And she does not have any embarrassing moment. And she doesn't even relate to any of the superheroes. To say. Now, at least Richard did surrender some information. They weren't the answers to the questions I had. So he did say he can't stand paper napkins, and then he eats cereal in the morning with a soup spoon, and that bread and butter topped with salt are her favorite food, and that he likes sauteed summer squash better than chocolate. That he once was a pin dropper in the tabernacle for the tourists. Took a lot of training.
Those are more interesting than your questions.
That he lives on the 10th floor of an apartment in New York with a great view of the Hudson River, and they can keep their car parking garage in South Norwalk, Connecticut, which is a half-an-hour train ride. I think they've done a few other things besides what we mentioned. You can probably look it up on the internet, and I'm sure they'll share it. I'm sure most of you are familiar with what they've done. This is a discussion group, so we hope they'll give us a chance to ask questions and get to know you more about how to respond to certain things. But without further ado, thank you very much for coming. Time is yours.
Well, we very much appreciate this opportunity to meet with you today, and as I say, you all do look very familiar. I've either met you all someplace, or I know somebody looks like. Case 1. About a month ago, I got an email from the Journal of Burmese Studies. Would you please review this article? I don't know anything about Burmese studies, said I, and I do American stuff. I can't possibly do that. Response. Oh, well, we know about the Burmese stuff, but the situation is that there was a big altercation between the British and the Burmese in 1875, and a new source has materialized from the archives of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. A missionary journal from a young man who had been called on a mission to Siam and had stopped off in Burma and was staying with some English officers in their, whatever it is, fortress, wherever they were, because they didn't have enough money to go out to Siam. And while he was there was this important altercation, which he saw firsthand and wrote about in his missionary journal. The best source. Even the official sources from Burma, from the British officers, were sort of, biased, and so they didn't figure that they were the. So this first great new source has emerged. Case 2. Yesterday, I was giving a comment at the Mormon History Association on a couple of programs, papers about programs. One was about the case of the ERA, the other about the situation where the Relief Society started a big literacy program. There were all kinds of official documents that were quoted in connection with talking about these things. But the real story emerged from the private documents that had been written by the people who were participating and had gotten down their experiences and their attitudes. So, conclusion. How many of you keep personal journals? Better than usual.
Facebook.
Better than usual.
Very personal.
How many of you think you should be keeping journals? How many would like to try to keep journals in the future? Few more. All right. You don't have 100% on any of these things, but that's what I'm talking about tonight, and we'll answer any questions down the line. But what we need is private sources. We need people to write about what they experience, what they see, what they like, what happens to them. This is not only important to the people that are descended from you, this is important to the church, this is important to the world. You can be major sources for things that happen. So I'm going to talk a little bit about journals, journal keeping, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the oral history program that we did, still are doing in various ways. And then Richard will talk, and then you can ask me any questions after that. Okay, how about keeping your journal? Now, lots of people think about keeping their journals on scented lavender paper. Bad idea. Keep them on your computer. Do it on your computer. When you get up in the morning, or when you get to the office, or wherever you're going, you turn on your computer, do your journal first. Write something, a page, less. One of the things I say is, when you're brushing your teeth, think of 2 things to write about. Then, when you turn on your machine, you write about those 2 things, a paragraph about each. And if you have more to say, go on. And then do that as a document starting January 1st. And keep it as one document till you get to the 31st. You get to the 31st, you have a full month recorded, print it out, punch holes in it, put it in the binder. Then you have hard and soft copies, which are printable, which are searchable, which are replaceable, which can go into various sources, and that's my best way of keeping your journal. Does anybody have a way that they think is better than that?
Well, just to add, they have the software Dragon Speak, which I found to really facilitate almost a conversational, so I can speak and it types it. Of course, I have to proof it at the end because it prints funny things, but it's a little easier for me to kind of share from my heart as I vocalize what I've
All right,
experienced.
those are very good things, but they say that, 10%. Of course, if it's just you, if you're the only one, gets to know you pretty well, that's a help.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's 10% corrections, which is a lot.
So mine's a little similar, but on most iPhones or any device, you can just record. So I've just done a lot of recordings, and it's kind of that personal thing. It's not transcribing it. So I don't have any printed thing, but I just have. And I am somewhat serious about Facebook. That has become, for a lot of people, in a sense, a journal.
I think that's true, but I'm against it. Anyway, all right. I still say my way's the best.
One thing I found really helps is writing to somebody in your journal. And I write to Jean in my journal because I feel very free to write everything. And it helps stay kind of a closeness there. And I don't do anything chronologically, but it happens to be doing that right now, but I just take a vignette, some little thing that happened, I write it down, and it doesn't matter if there's, a lot of stuff around it if you don't have time to do it. But just each day, like you say, jot that down, and I handwrite it. It may not be legible someday, but I want the handwriting.
Yeah. All right, I think having an audience is always a good thing. I say write your reaction, because then you're more likely to fill in the background what you have to say. And when you have a person, identify them. If there's somebody that dies, write an obituary. Yes.
I think it's important too when you are prompted to write. I mean, this seems like a group where I can feel safe saying that.
rather than doing it regularly?
Well, rather than just saying I've got to check this box, I'm raising 4 kids right now, and my life is told through Facebook, believe it or not, so you're going to not like that. But I write stories about the experiences I'm having with my children. But I can't tell you, and she can testify. I write about our life on Facebook, and I actually paragraph them, proofread them, I title them, and there they are. But sometimes at 2 in the morning, I'll wake up and go, holy cow, I need to write about this. I would write those down. Keep something by your bed because they prompt me.
Claudia, can I just say, I think we might need to shut this door a little bit, and then just talk as loud as you can.
That's not loud enough? I thought that was
sorry.
pretty loud.
Just know people are having a hard time. We'll keep it open, but not quite so much.
All right, I would just say there are variations, but it's a very good thing to keep a record. It's not just for the future, it's for you. I know people that say, oh, my children would be interested, so I'm not going to keep a journal. But the situation is, it's for the person who writes it. If you keep a journal of your life, you will live a better life. It is so easy to say, nothing ever happens to me. My life is of no importance. It just kills me when I see somebody who is devoting his life to writing a biography of somebody and doesn't keep an equivalent record of his own. How short-sighted is that? Okay, well then I will just I want to say a little bit about oral histories. Now I have this wonderful collection of oral histories, which is housed at Claremont Graduate University, where they took place, most of them took place, while Richard and I were teaching Mormon studies there. And included in our collection are Charlotte, England, yes, and don't I have yours? I may have. No, all right, I have 2. Let's see, who else do I have? Maxine, you never have
turned
written
it in yet.
yours. I've been around Maxine for 100 years.
It's such an involved, I mean, really, it's a long.
No excuse.
I'll send it in, I promise, this month.
Anyway, I have a number of these, and there is just no, the best story you will ever have to tell is the story of your own life. That is the best story. You don't want anybody else to tell it. You should tell it yourself. And the truth is that unless you write, well, let's see, how do I say this? If you don't write things down, you will forget them. Yes? If you don't write them down, you will be forgotten. How long do you think you'll last if you have no written documents that survive you? There's an old African proverb that says, how does it say it? When an old person dies, it's as if a library has burned down. Just think of all the things in your mind, all the people you know, all the connections, all those experiences, which one day could be accessed and the next day are gone forever. That's very dramatic. And so, you should write. But in these oral histories.
Now that the door is shut, you don't need to put your hands up.
But we liked it so much.
It was cute,
Okay. Yes.
Okay, so if we haven't done all this wonderful record keeping, how do we back up? Do you back up or do you just start where you are?
You start today. Start today. Then if you have any reason to reach back, then you talk about that. And then, but that's for your daily journal. When you do your whole oral history or your whole biography, then you start at the beginning. They're different.
Do you think it's more important to write factual things that took place, occurrences that kind of give it a whole context, or to write more about your philosophical thoughts about life that are triggered by some experience, which I get totally off on that tangent, and then it gets pages and pages and pages. But
Large plates versus small plates.
What you should write is whatever you have to say. But I'd say, I think you really should talk about the day, what you did in the day, what significant things occurred, You should write those things. But there are all kinds of ways to think about what to write. One of mine I told somebody tonight is, think about your grandmother. What do you wish you knew about her that you don't know? Okay, write it about yourself. Just do that. Write it about yourself. I think you should write current events. I mean, the political situation is dynamic, to say the least. And your attitudes of how that is, or how you feel about sporting events, I'd say that's significant. I worked a long time on a farmer who had a formula for his journal. He wrote about 4 things every day, and then he would write about whatever else. First, he wrote about what the weather was like. His weather is very important for him. He could check back year after year and see what the weather had been like on that day. And then he would write what work was done. He's a slave owner. Who did what? So he had a record of that. Then he'd write who was sick. And because he was a Thomsonian doctor, which is a botanical doctor, which is what Willard Richards was, he could talk about how he had treated those people, largely with alcohol. And then, because he was a fervent Methodist, he would bear his testimony. Then he would write whatever else. And he started with a book and did his diary from the beginning, started at the back, did his finances until they met in the middle. Then he shelved the book and started a new one. His life was in that book. Very useful work. Okay.
I heard you speak, was it 2 years ago for your birthday celebration in association with the Mormon History Mormon Women's History Initiative? And you talked about saving emails, printing emails that you write to your children as part of your journal.
Right, okay. That's another thing I do, which I think is very useful. I send out weekly letters to my family, about 30 people, my greater family. And I write those on my journal. Often I will write a long family letter instead of writing an entry for the day. Then I just copy those and send them out to everybody. Then I often get answers. And so when I get an answer, I just drop them in to my online journal afterwards. And so I have information. And then if I get other significant letters, I just add those too. So when I print out a month's journal, I have maybe 30 pages, maybe 70 pages, depending on how much has gone on, single space. And, I've got a record. I've got a record of what went on that month. All right, I'm going to stop now and let Richard talk for a minute, but save any questions that you have on this, and we'll talk about it again.
You open that door there, please.
Well, it's great to see you all. I'm surprised at how few people I know are in this audience. It's a great opportunity to meet new people and in considerable numbers. One of the advantages of not being around much, living as far away as we do in New York City, is people come to think you're magical. That's something glorious, let's say, that transform their lives. You're going to raise your hand if you can't hear me, right? Will you raise your hand if you can't hear me? Okay.
If I can hear you, everyone can.
Lots of you have heard of the Temple Observatory group that Terrell Gibbons began. This was an attempt to address groups just like this around the church. He and Fiona, and for a while Claudia and I, went out and talked to people about problems of their faith. And I saw him yesterday, and he's still going out. They're spending 180 days a year on the road speaking to groups like this. So if you want one measure of interest in these issues, that's it. And they first were informal groups, someone like Mark England saying, come and speak. Not church, and they preferred not church because you don't want to get involved in all the problems there. But now the stake presidents are calling to talk. So it's a phenomenon that's occurring. I was at one of these in Washington, D.C., just outside, and there was a young woman who stood up in the question and answer period and spoke about her and her husband, how they had their troubles and how she had come back to the church and he had not. But what she had discovered and was necessary was what she said, we have to reconstruct the narrative. To reconstruct the narrative. And I think you all know instantly what that means. There have been so many disruptive facts that have come on the scene in a little while that almost every significant episode has a new take. First vision, see it all differently now. The discovery of the various versions. Translation. Did you in primary learn about a hat with a stone? We're having to look newly at the Book of Abraham. We have to look newly at Joseph's marriages. Everywhere in that crucial founding period, the story is being changed. And what I wanted to do is say a little bit about the historical background of that process that so many of us are going through, and some of its implications for us today. I think it actually begins in the 1950s and early 60s, when for the first time, Latter-day Saints began to seek doctoral degrees in the social sciences and the humanities. There were a trickle of people who went to college, went to university somewhere, usually in the East, came back with PhDs. After the war, Leonard Arrington goes off, Tom Alexander, James Allen, me. There were lots of people, and that number has just steadily grown. So now there are vast numbers of PhDs. Lots of these people wanted to write about Mormon topics for their PhDs because that was their lives. So they wrote their dissertations on these subjects. And two things came out of that. One, they had to learn a new language. They had to write in such a way that they could present a paper in a graduate seminar, that they could present a dissertation to a dissertation committee of academics, not Mormons. And that language that we're so accustomed to use, that familiar diction is so familiar we don't even know we're using it, just didn't wash. They had to find a new way to put things. So they came back with that ability to speak beyond the borders of Zion. They could speak to academics everywhere. The second thing that happened is that group of people began to both discover facts and to evaluate facts that and the insiders dismissed the critical variety because they said that's anti-Mormon, we can't trust it, we don't trust the sources, all those affidavits that Hurlbut collected, that can't be discussed, they're just dismissed. And all the things that Tanners were developing in those years, a whole set of facts that were disrupted, were all just no heed was paid to them. These professionals had the ability to evaluate the sources. That's what you learned in graduate school, is to evaluate sources. They all have bias, every source has bias. You have to work your way through that to what you consider factual in your way and tell the story. So for the first time, church members were learning, if they followed literature, about things that were unfamiliar to them before. Because in the process of evaluating, they decided, yes, Joseph Smith was put on trial for money or looking in a seer stone in 1826. Previously, that had been considered a fabrication and not to be believed. So you begin to collect all these materials that altered the story, but had been vetted by historians who were faithful Mormons, who could be trusted, worked for Leonard Eric there, and wrote for journals that Mormons would read and believe. And the result of that was the creation of a very large literature. You've all probably seen the Mormon Bib, a huge, thick book just listing articles on Mormonism, just poured out. Books and articles of all different varieties and qualities came forward. Well, that had some interesting effects. One was that Mormon scholars, for the first time, were trusted by non-Mormons. It used to be if you were a reporter doing a Mormon story, you'd come to Utah, you'd talk to all the church people, and then you'd go to the University of Utah and try to find an academic who would give them an objective view of what Mormonism was really about. The insider story just could not be trusted. Well, with this, by I don't know, I would say the mid-90s, around 2000, and certainly by the time that Romney came on the scene, there were quite a number of people to whom NPR or the New York Times or AP could go and feel like they were getting a straight story, which they never felt they could get from Church Public Affairs, even if they're getting a straight story, because they couldn't trust them. They trusted these scholars. They had the credentials, they had the degrees, they were teaching in the universities, and so they were trustworthy. They were cited. They could be presented as an objective scholarly view. When these Mormon studies chairs began to be established in universities, Claremont Graduate University, USU, and now University of Virginia, the candidates, the final candidates for the position were all Latter-day Saints, card-carrying Latter-day Saints. There could have been others, probably should have been considered, but the Mormon historians themselves dominated the field. So what has happened is a phrase that was used a lot when the Joseph Smith papers were being put together was, we need to own our own history. Tell our story, and with the authority of that. But we're to the position where Mormon scholars are, for the first time, taken very seriously. So all that is good, and that is one of the outcomes of this wave of Mormon scholarship that came forward after the 1950s. The downside of that is that there is developing in the scholarly world a view of church history that's out of kilter with the church version, what's told in Sunday school class. All sorts of things that don't fit together, such as the seer stone in the hat, or many, many other things. And that was a very dangerous situation, because there came a time when the stuff is collected, it's made available online, and people trying to prepare a Relief Society lesson would go online to try to collect some information, and suddenly hit with this counter story that they'd never heard before, that was authenticated, it's got footnotes behind it, it's got authority behind it. And not only do you have this disjuncture of things just aren't fitting anymore, but a question of why wasn't I told this before? A sense of betrayal and even rage, anger, and this somewhat illogical but understandable view, they've been lying to me all along, as if the church authorities knew it all and they were just concealing it. There was a little bit of that. They did hide Mountain Meadows for a while, but on the whole, the church authorities had no better knowledge of church history than the ordinary members, and the general authorities had to be educated in this new kind of history. So it's put us in this difficult position where we're being asked to change very rapidly to a new construct of our own history. and it's put a lot of strain on a lot of people. It's quite amazing how over the last few years, the church, both formally and informally, is trying to adjust to that with all these gospel topic stories that deal with the difficult issues, all being assimilated in the church curriculum. Elder Ballard saying, we all have to learn this material. We have to be ready. Our kids have to learn it. We don't want any more surprises. And I think what's most heartwarming is that the policy of transparency now governs church publication. Well, let's see, I'd say historical publication. It's a little different, but it's changing. Part of Marlon Jensen's genius as church historian was that when he wanted when the Joseph Smith papers were going forward with a mandate from President Hinckley, do papers that the scholars will value. That is, be rigorous, be open. As he was moving forward with that project, he just didn't take that and run with it and turn out his marvelous papers. He brought along all the Quorum of the 12, the First Presidency, and CES. So we got everyone agreeing that what we're doing here is to be the new standard of truth, historical truth for the church, what goes into those papers. I think we're pretty well there. Claudia and I are church history advisors. We were called into a seminar in Salt Lake. Elder Holland addressed us and talking about collecting history out in the provinces. He said, transparency is the watchword. Then he said, not everyone agrees with me. Around here agrees with me, but I'm telling you, it is the watchword. And what that tells me is the balance of power is shifted. That there are going to be general authorities and lots of others who say, why bother with all that stuff? It just mucks up the picture. But on the whole, that's official policy is we're never going to be secure in our own history until we tell it straight. And I think that's what they're going to try to do. So the big question in my mind with all these things you've been doing, you've got that, you've got all these books that are coming out, Terrell and Fiona's book, Crucible of Doubt, and Patrick Mason's book. Laura Hales has a new book out on reasoning about our church history. With all these things that are happening in groups like this, will we actually be able to instruct the rising generation of Latter-day Saints? I'd say those who are, say, 12 or 13, sufficiently so that there will be no surprises. There may be issues and problems. This doesn't solve the problem of gay marriage, but it is attempting to deal with the problems of historical incongruities. And are we going to be successful in bringing that along so there will no longer be that shock or that anger that they had been cheated on, that they hadn't been told the whole story. So I may not live long enough to see that happen, but everyone else in the room will test that.
Has there been a similar parallel process in Christendom as some scholars have New Testament scholars, for example, looking at history of texts and the formulation of who Jesus was? I mean, can we learn from what other faiths have gone through in their own evolution?
We can. It took place a century ago.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the higher criticism is rolling in the late 1800s, and it's really in the first 4 or 5 decades. Yeah, we can learn from it. Maybe it's a cautionary tale to give us pause, because the first response was to gut the scriptures. Once people learned, well, they're just historical documents, all sorts of contradictions attached together from various pieces. They're not written when they say they're written. It just sort of turned the Bible into another form of world literature with no authority over your spiritual life. That has been balanced, and I think that there's a lot of Christian churches that are able to absorb a lot of the story. There's still as contention that evangelicals still want the infallible Bible, but there are lots of informed evangelicals who handle it. So I would say the general report from the Protestant and Catholic world is positive, that you can't live through all this. And I worried for a while it would so dilute religion, that it would become insipid, there'd be no edge to it, no grip on your life, nothing to hold on to. But that hasn't happened. So it gives us all hope.
I was wondering if this history is changing how we're dreaming or how we're thinking. And I'm thinking of like the community of Christ, that they have this call to be a prophetic people. Is that calling us to have more of that prophetic thing personally, and to do kind of that inward journey and have that personal relationship with God instead of just trust your leaders that they're going to tell you what to do?
Yeah. Well, the community of Christ is a very interesting example of us, because they have gone the way of the liberal mind. They're taking all the miraculous stuff out of it, let the Book of Mormon fade into insignificance, emphasize peace, love, and they haven't flourished. They're just fixed. They haven't grown 20% in the last half century. And we all know that it's the religions that have an edge, that demand belief of some kind, that move forward. So do we really, the language is beautiful. When I hear them preach, I say, yes, that's the gospel I love. But on the other hand, it isn't the gospel that has energy or strength. So I'm not sure, we've got to find another path than the community of Christ.
I'm sorry, were you first?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, ladies.
Yes, ladies.
Okay, so since you were a front runner as a scholar and a believer, encountering these historical documents for your dissertation, can you tell us how that impacted your faith, reading all of these things, and how did you maintain your faith if it ever did come in conflict with faith?
It's a natural question, and I don't really have a good answer to it. It has something to do with my youthful history. That early on, my question was, does the universe speak? That is there a God? Is there an intelligence? And so my temptation is agnosticism on religious issues, having little to do with Mormonism. So it's not the church, it's not the problems of the church or church history. So I always had kind of an open view to historical problems. And they came along little by little. I was of that generation of PhDs, or learning step by step. It doesn't suddenly hit me one night on the internet that, it's all there. I sort of absorbed it. So when people think when I wrote Joseph Smith's history, it must be this, that's trial of my faith, trying all these things. Not a bit of it. It all just flowed very easily. It's the easiest book I've ever written. It just came, because I already knew so much. So, in that sense, I'm not a very good model for the current generation whose experiences. It's a shock rate I never experienced. Yes,
I wondered, so it's, to me, a lot of the incongruity that exists now, that is giving rise to a lot of crisis of faith and doubt situations, seems to be caused, in my view, by the disparity between the dominant narrative, what I would call the orthodox narrative, which is what we learn as missionaries, what we teach, investigators, what we learn in Sunday school. And then as you get older, you kind of start to experience Mormonism in different ways. And those ways become very important to you and dear to you, but sometimes they may not jive with some of the elements of the Orthodox narrative. And so what I'm wondering is, like, in your view, do you see room within Mormonism for several different narratives, multiple narratives? of a religious experience? Or do you think that in order for the church to remain strong, they would have to hold to that dominant narrative?
I think for the church to remain strong, it has to reconstruct its narrative. The dominant narrative is not true. It can't be sustained. So the church has to absorb all this new information, or it'll be on very shaky grounds, and that's what it's trying to do. And it'll be a strain for a lot of people, older people especially. But I think it has to change. Elder Packer had this sense of protecting the little people. He felt like the scholars were the enemy to this faith, and it was the grandmothers living in San Pete County. And that was a very lovely pastoral image. But the price of protecting the grandmothers was the loss of the grandsons. They got a story that didn't work. So we've just had to change our.
It seems to me because like what you're saying, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I just wonder, we have such a strong tradition of emphasizing the dominant Orthodox narrative, and so how does the church do that without, like you say, like pushing some people away while also introducing, the idea that it's okay to experience Mormonism in different ways?
Yeah. The question is, will we leave room to experience Mormonism in different ways, or is our strength the fact that we all hold on to the same tree?
Precisely.
We're all hugging that same
Tree huggers.
Yeah.
Not here in Utah.
I actually am concerned about that, and I think people who have a more progressive view or who are up to date on what's going on, and they know the mature version, have to be very sympathetic for people who are having trouble letting go. We gotta. There just has to be many ways to grow the church. We want them to be sympathetic of us as we struggle along. But it has to be a brotherly and sisterly act. We don't want to break up our community, which is our great strength, the beauty of the church, in the name of finding some abstract truth that works better for each one of us. So it's going to be a struggle for the next, 2 or 3 decades anyway, as we go through this process.
One of the challenges I face, I'm a father of 4, and I'm staring down the barrel of a historical shotgun that tells me that I'm disconnected from that dominant narrative. And I've got kids going to Sunday school, and they're coming home, and they hear the conversations I have with my wife. They hear the conversations I have with my friends. I'm not going to hide that in my home. I'm not going to be a hostage to preventing or to preserving a dominant narrative in my own home. I just won't. But the challenge I find is how do you introduce that to kids? And I know you made a comment about you're not really sure with this current generation, but that, and anybody has any insights. I have children, and I'm going, Dad, do you believe the Joseph Smith story about the plates? I'm like, hell no. Or do you think he was a prophet? I'm like, I can't possibly say that unless we could agree on a definition of a prophet that allows for that much fallibility. Then maybe I could. The problem is I don't know how to maintain that community with my own kids, much less my neighbors, when there's such a disparity between that dominant narrative and what I'm finding out. Thank you to your book.
You can't hide it. You don't want to hide it from your kids. That's going to set up tension.
And that's what I felt like I was co-opted into doing, and I just did not like that.
Right, you can't hide it. But you've got to be humble about it. Do you think you now know the truth?
No, absolutely. I know more, but my mind's open. I just know more.
The fact that I still believe there were gold plates, you're willing to accept me as a brother who may be right. You may be wrong, and I may be right. You're willing to accept. See, if you do it in sort of a humble way, say, well, I have a different view on this. I've always had trouble with gold plates, but I know a lot of people that do play them. So we got to leave space. Some people say we should split into divisions. There should be a liberal wing, like the Jews. That's not the Mormon way. We stick with people where their troubles are. We want to hold together.
Thank you. Thank you.
Brothers and sisters. Yes.
How much
and I don't know if you're part of this in the conversation. So I'm one that's probably that way too. That's like I've tossed out the doctrinal part of the church personally, and this is just me. But I love the institutional part, like the community, the value that I think the world desperately needs. That I'm not necessarily truly secular in that, but how much do people see the risk for a church? I see the church as like a survival of the fittest. It was Darwinian church. It put in place the pieces that were necessary for a community to be built that was really able to thrive in the world, especially that existed through the 20th century. How much fear is there that embracing that truth kind of goes against what really enabled the church to thrive? I don't know everybody else is going to taste the spirit. I know that that's a natural thought too.
Embracing what truth?
Embracing what the found documentation is, the historical truth, in quotes. How much could that potentially put at risk? Because, in my experience, the foot soldiers of the church don't really care about the details. They care about the community. That's what really matters. They're not really worried about how many wives Joseph Smith had, or if that, and, as somebody who looks at it in a different way, I love the church. I fear that, going that approach might actually damage the community in many ways because they're worried so much about embracing it. And actually, I think a lot of the releases, from a church PR perspective, suggest that actually that fear is real because they really, the Blacks and the Priests, their release a couple of years ago that talked about it suggests we don't really want to deal with that. At least there's that segment that believes that.
Well, I think people can hold on to the church however they can hold on to the church. If you got one grip on it, you want to hold on to it. If yours is community and service and brotherly love, great. But you don't want to disparage doctrine and say it really is irrelevant. What's important is to love and care for one another. For lots of people, it is relevant. And in general, worldviews, what is the reality of the world, ends up affecting what happens eventually in that community. And you want to keep your eye on current scholarship in the church because there's a lot of work being done on the power of ritual, and the power of narrative, these grand narratives about the history of the world. And you may regain a new appreciation of it. And you may not say, well, I can't believe that's literally true, but I can see its power. And I'm willing to listen to it and talk it even.
That's actually my point then, which is that ritual, community, all the things the church built, I don't necessarily believe are from the mouth of God, right? The temple ceremony and those, but that community, the sense that they hold to them is real. And I feel that sometimes you might threaten that because you're so worried about getting at the absolute fact of what happened in 1843 on June 3rd that you're so worried about that you forget, what's really bringing us together. And it really isn't, in most cases, that.
But it may be doctrinal. It can be doctrinal. So you can't just say, I've given up on the doctrines.
Well, for some, then maybe there isn't a place. I think you can. That's the thought. I think you can.
What I'm saying is I want you to keep listening for new words about the potency of doctrine.
Yeah.
Because you may see that there's more connections between the two.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. All right. So, I don't know, by age 12, what I hear a lot of friends and people online experiencing, maybe through the CES letter or elsewhere, I was aware of when I was 12. And I really have loved the New Mormon history, the great history that I've been exposed, able to read. I read Mormon Enigma as soon as it came out. I was in my early 20s. I read No Man Knows My History, and I loved it. And it made Emma and Joseph more interesting and more complex and more relatable. And I loved Stone Rolling and so many other books. That has not affected my faith. It's actually made me more interested in my Mormon faith to see the complexity and the humanity of these people of many generations ago.
I think for me, what has been the struggle has been the expectation of conformity, and it has nothing to do with our history. It's the pressure to conform and not express. And so I see that as kind of two different things. And the other thing I have noticed among people who have gone through more recent faith crises is they've, suddenly come across this information either through the essays or, maybe they've read Rough Stone Rolling, and they go, whoa! And for many of these people, they go from one black and white version to another black and white version. So the Hinckley quote that's given that it's all a fraud or it's the greatest. I can't remember the exact quote, but there's a quote that it's all a fraud or it's all true. And that's not how I see it, And but the people are like falling into that same thing. They're just going from inside the church to outside the church and going, it's all false then. And so I guess how does one develop a more, which to me isn't very healthy. It doesn't seem very healthy. It doesn't allow for complexity of and real true relatedness among people that are believing and non-believing. If there is like all true or all false. And so maybe if you can just address that.
Well, I'm not going to talk about institutional ways of doing that.
Right, it's more
Instructions
personal,
to
just personal.
You can embody it. You can be paired in your comments in Sunday school or Relief Society. I think all those things are true. So I'm not sure that there's any easy way to teach people to live with ambiguity. Yeah, that's almost a personality characteristic.
Right.
So as you say, they're all for the church or they're all against the church. I think one thing we can do is to propound alternate testimony patterns.
Okay.
One testimony pattern is Joseph Smith. You have questions, you're uncertain, you go to the Lord, you pray, and God appears to you, and there you are. You now know the path you're taking. The other testimony is Alma 32, planting a seed, nurturing it, it grows a little, you nurture it some more, it grows some more. So it isn't an instantaneous revelation, but it's an ongoing life path. And so when everyone says, if you pray and you're sincere, God will give you a testimony. I think we're in a position where we have to say, it doesn't work that way for everyone. There are other ways of getting a testimony. I've known people who were destroyed by that confidence that they would get a testimony. They just prayed hard. Yeah. You can't doubt their sincerity or their righteousness.
Yeah.
So we have to be open, various paths to finding what's true.
Okay.
Christine.
Just to say, I think one really hopeful thing is that young people can handle this stuff. I taught Alma 32 to a bunch of 9-year-olds, and I sent them out to observe the plants around the Belmont Chapel, and then said, "What did you see?" And they said, "Well, there were, sometimes there were lots of different kinds of plants growing right next to each other, and sometimes one plant that was the same kind would be bigger than the other one right next to it, and none of them were perfect, and they were all different. Some of them were pretty ugly, but they were the biggest, strongest ones." And they instantly, at 9 and 10, made that connection to different kinds of testimonies, and we're fine with talking about testimony that way. And I feel like if we could, just show them not to be afraid when they're that age, that and I said, because I remember being 12 and thinking, wait, my testimony is not like, it's not working like it is for these other kids at youth conference, and it doesn't take a lot. And kids are flexible and ready for that.
Right,
So,
and you can still use words like inspiration and Heavenly Father and testimony even, but just find it in different ways. All right, Christine, it's your assignment is to teach all the children the church.
No, never do it for the adults first.
Yes, if the church needs to rewrite its narrative to be more sustainable, as you said, do you believe that they, and I don't, is that the Brethren or church history somewhere, do you believe that it can be done in such a way that they don't have to purge the past and admit that they were wrong, uninspired, and imperfect?
Well, you have to hope so. Someone said there'll be a time when Catholic priests will be allowed to marry. And the announcement will read thus: the Mother Church has always taught. So you can't break with the past too abruptly. An institution has to preserve itself.
Yeah.
So I think that's what will happen.
That's the reality.
Yeah.
Richard, there's a.
Yeah, I know, we gotta
go
go
right
to the other
behind you,
side.
right next to you.
Yes, back there.
So if we need a new narrative, what is that narrative?
Well, it's a set of details. In the first vision, that we learn more things about Joseph Smith's experience. What he really was seeking was forgiveness. The first words that are spoken to him is, Joseph, thy sins are forgiven. And suddenly the whole story becomes different, that we keep looking at revelation after revelation, saying, to begin, your sins are forgiven. The appearance of Christ in the Cullom Temple, first words of Christ is, your sins are forgiven. So that you start with a fact, and then it sort of reshapes the whole thing. And then it's just a matter of inserting the seer stone in the hat.
And why give that emphasis to the forgiveness first vision story versus the, like, for example, the one we've given?
Are they what?
Why you seem very confident. My understanding is that there are several first vision stories.
Right.
And they were given over time, sort of in correlation to
What's
just
needed.
misunderstanding.
Yeah, right.
So why then do you pick the one about forgiveness as the one we should go with?
I don't think you should get in a position of picking. You have to say, we learn more about it when we look at it from various angles. I particularly like the 1832 version because it's written in his own hand. You know it's from his head. 1838, it's written in his name, but we don't know who wrote it. But I don't want to discount that. I don't want to undermine it. It's just that there's another perspective.
And one last follow-up, do you see that shifting our focus or theology in any way, or is it just?
Well, in this sense that, we live in the age when grace is finally entering the church, and the whole notion of grace and forgiveness as a stance that we can continually adopt. Now it's more verification if you start with this other version of the first vision, so it supports things that are going on in the church today.
Just a question on what you see as maybe your role in the church, and if you see that aligning with maybe how the Mormon community kind of views you, maybe as a very hot topic or a hot item, right? Like they want to come hear you talk. Do you see your role as the leading expert on Joseph Smith, the historical expert, inspirational speaker? I guess what do you see as your role kind of right now?
Just a humble man. Well, all these things have a certain providential quality to them. I wrote Joseph's Roughtstone Rolling because the Joseph Fielding Smith Institute says we've been surveyed the historiography, we need a new biography. 2005 is coming up, so I just jump in and write a book. So the first signature part I had was a Deseret book. And as I'm getting out of the parking garage, going down to the Deseret book, I meet this guy who says, I'm going to go buy some copies of your book. I'm going to buy a copy for every one of my sons and grandsons. So he buys 12 copies of the book. I'm astounded by that. And, the number of books that were sold. Random House had to increase the press run by 10,000 because Costco put in an order for 10,000 copies of the book, which they put on pallets in the Costco stores in Utah and Idaho. And I was astounded. I got a call from Knopf saying, "What's happening?"
In the bulk section.
No one can understand this. And after a while, I said, "Well, I wrote a pretty good book, and people like it." But I realized that it was a phenomenon. It was the timing it came in a moment when people wanted that kind of language and that presentation of Joseph Smith. They wanted the whole story.
And it was next to the chocolate macadamia square.
You know about retailing. So I just say, I'm just a guy who tries to do his job, but Providence intervenes or something comes along so that the timing was particularly good in that case.
Right, yeah. This girl right here, she's been so
Yes.
patient.
So I'm just realizing that, suddenly realizing that my paradigm and how I see the church is different than the mainstream, for sure. And I am a Relief Society teacher. And my particular challenge has just been that I do want to be sensitive to those with the old narrative. I am concerned. I know that people are there to be edified. But I also feel sometimes it's at odds with my authenticity or what is written in the lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wonder if you have any words of
Yeah.
advice for of how we present that and how we can be ourselves but also be sensitive.
It's a huge problem. I run into it all the time with graduate students because they're going to graduate school, they're learning about the Old Testament, they're learning about this or that, and they don't feel at home in the church because when they go to their ward meetings because they can't speak out and they're in trouble. And I talked to someone who lived in the ward where these graduate students were going. And they said, those graduate students are obnoxious. They come in with all their smarty stuff in graduate school and try to instruct us in the truth. So I think we have to examine our own hearts. We have to be pure in heart when we talk about this. And we can't be iconoclast. I know some things you hadn't dreamed of. And this feeling that I'm the custodian of the truth. The other thing is, I always say it's like teaching sex to your children. If you're nervous about it, they will get nervous. So you have to sort of assimilate it into that you can sort of tell it as here's some new things we're learning, and you have to be a scholar about it. Because if you tell people something they did not know before, they immediately say, "Where did you get that?" And you can't just say, "I got it out of Richard Bushman's book." You got to know you got it from Emma Smith's testimony to her father. So go in loaded because people are going to say, "You're shaking my tree," and I want to know where you're coming from. So it's not an easy thing.
And don't be nervous about it.
Yeah.
Maybe talk about sex instead.
All right.
There was talk in the past a little while ago about a book on the gold plates. Is that still in the offing? Are you working on that?
I know we're going to finish a book on the gold plates. I've been advertising the fact that I'm going to write a book on the gold plates. And I'm doing group research. I'm enlisting everyone if they ever find references to gold plates to let me know. The stuff keeps pouring in. I'm finishing up a book I started before I did Russell Rolling on the American farmer in the 18th century, which I started because I wanted background for Joseph Smith. So that's getting closer. And then I do plan to go to the gold plates as a very powerful deposit in the American imagination. It's now a public property. It gets into novels, it gets into high-level dramas. It's everywhere. Even Joseph
It's on
Smith,
Broadway.
yeah, Tony Kushner's Angels in America has the gold plates as its theme. So it's just how this gold plates has functioned in the Mormon imagination and in the American imaginations.
So
Yeah.
maybe one more, 2 questions on that, and then I'd love maybe Claudia to be involved too, but the other big hit after the faith, the history, was the LGBT thing that I know lots of people still do. If we could just touch on that too, as I know people have questions. That feminism,
Here tonight or tomorrow?
feminism in general. But I'd love to hear from Claudia too, but maybe.
Well, actually, that's, I wanted to pull Claudia in because I heard that all of your success actually comes from marrying Claudia. By people who know you, and I'm just curious, how do you work together, and do you co-author? Is she helping you write, or is she editing, or how do you guys navigate history together?
Go ahead.
She's a smart aleck, right?
I think we tell pretty much the same story. She can't stand the way I write, and that's very good to have an editor who thinks you're no good. She reads every word I write, and she has something to say. And I am getting better, right?
He's improved a lot.
So my take on Claudia is that she has ideas she's not aware of. So I tell her what she's saying.
That was her job.
It's actually a terrific collaboration. Well, someone who has a question on this line.
I don't know whether this is just a faith-destroying rumor or what, but Greg Prince's new biography on Harrington was based on his diary of like 20,000 pages or something. And I've heard, and I'm not sure what church policy is, that personal writings and this kind of stuff is not as open. Like the church has, I don't even know what the right terminology is, in hand, and whether that can be used or not in histories. And I'm wondering, have we come to the end of it in terms of, a really good biography and history of the church when things, the current apostles or prophets write are probably not going to be available, or is that just a bad rumor?
No, it's true.
No, it's true. It's true. I was hired by the church, to edit some of the Joseph homes. So I went through the initiation rites. And one is that you promise you will not go home and write your journals about what you did at work that day. Which, you can see what lies behind it, but I think it's a great mistake.
So that's true, and will likely have a damping effect on writing good history?
It will have a damping effect, but not an elimination effect, because there will be people.
You tell Claudia, and Claudia writes.
Questions for Claudia?
Well, this could go for either of you, but and like you said earlier, don't be an iconoclast just to cause trouble. I don't mean to, but reaching out to this, and you said to do things in brotherly love. I'd be like a little bit the opposite in some ways on the doctrine. Like I love the doctrine. I think there's a lot of I get intellectually stimulated by a lot of doctrines of the church. I think there's so much there. And I also do love community too. And I mean, we all have our problems in the administration of the church, maybe where mine is, but so I guess I would ask you about your views of the doctrine, because you also seem to defend it a little bit, the doctrines of the church. And do you still, even in very academic studies, find enlightenment and stimulation through going to church ever? And in doctrinal ways as well. So Claudia, maybe you should start.
Yeah, that's what he's the doctrinal person. I'm the cultural person.
Well, I think there's a lot to be desired in Sunday school classes. Our sermons are not polished. Good preachers are just thrilling, thoughtful things you've never heard. We live right next door to Riverside Church, which is the big church that's had famous preachers over the years. We sometimes go up there. Thrilling sermons. But We taught a class on contemporary Mormonism at Columbia. And the first assignment was for the students, every student had to go to a 3-hour block. I did one whole work. And then they had to write a response to it. And they were really exuberant about a simple husband-wife team talking about how they were trying to live the gospel in their versions. Just the simplicity of it. And my own feeling is the long run, just plain ordinary people getting up and trying to say something has more lasting interest than having a polished preacher up there who really lays it out for you. So I go in sort of an appreciative mood, and all of my brothers and sisters are willing to stand up and do their best to say something about their lives.
I agree with that, and it is the variety, and that everybody does it. I mean, everybody in the church can speak because we all have it. And it's just wonderful for us in our everyday lives, and wonderful for us as Mormons. I love it.
I often hear people say, well, I believe the church is true, but at a certain point in their life, they encounter something they see as some new evidence that's kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back. That's the last straw, and okay, I'm not going to believe anymore. And that's discouraging to me because I see the gospel, whatever you want to call that, or faith, or experience with God, and this religion and this church, and whatever you define that as far more complex than finding out that there's more than one version of the first vision. And so it begs the question for me, there must have been something more to that person than just, well, I read that there's 3 different versions or 7 different versions of the first vision, and therefore the church lied to me, and therefore I can't believe just Smith's prophet anymore. I'm guessing there's something else building up to that. But putting that aside, can you address or that, this prophet did something over here? Can you address, both of you, as you've done your studies, read people's journals, how do you tell people to gain perspective on that so that they aren't just kind of blown away by one particular thing? How do you, as you were studying the life of Joseph Smith, was there ever a point when you were reading certain things and it was just like, wow, I don't know if I can handle this? And how do you put that in perspective of everything else? Because it is far more complex than just, well, they wrote different versions of the first vision.
Well, I frequently feel that way myself. The last time I remember that I actually said it is when they announced that we were going to have sacrament meeting at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I said to all the people around me, that's it. In many cases, I pretended with them. I go to church at 1 o'clock, but I still hate it. It doesn't make me feel good.
Claudia is made president, things would be much.
And see, I feel so grateful that I can tell people these things. I do tell them. They take me sort of seriously. That's all right. That's another thing.
I would just say one thing about this. It's not exactly answering your question, but I've been so frustrated talking to people like this, unable to comprehend why one little thing will throw them off. And for me, I can roll with the punches and it seems so hard. And I don't know, I just bang my head against the wall so much. I'm very discouraged. I've got to the point of asking one question. Come on, tails. Do you believe in Christ? There you go. And if they say they believe in Christ, they say, you're going to be okay. Don't worry, you're okay. A lot of them say, no, the whole thing's good. I'm not sure if you can God anymore.
And that's very discouraging to me, because it means that in the process of learning this huge collection of cultural lore that comes into our heads as Mormons, they haven't actually. Joseph Smith's a problem, and when Joseph Smith goes, Christ goes. There's something wrong with that. There's something we're not sure right.
I'm tired of that.
Yeah. And I don't know what the solution is to it, but I think that's the problem.
And my question or comment, I guess, ties in with that. To me, how do you, all the things that we've talked about can be interpreted as kind of, how do we make sense of these things, or is this story more true than that? And it's all, in effect, an intellectual exercise. And what I have found as a convert to the church, truly compelling, is that there's an invitation, and it comes from the mouth of Joseph Smith, who said, you know, it's the privilege of every child of God to come to God and get revelation. To me, this is it's a qualitative shift. I am not expected to make sense of all of this, you know, all of the historical accuracy or inaccuracy. But the question, I guess, do I find God's Spirit invite me to give my heart and partake of this restored gospel message? And to me, it is overwhelmingly compelling. I mean, I've had God, you know, witness to me. And so it's kind of this brain sorting out, you know, all the story stuff, but just trusting that I've had this, you know, these witnesses from God. And to me, I mean, how do you stay in the scholarly world and have your feet planted in revelation that God has talked to you about this?
Claudia loved that. She thinks that's our real message, that you can receive revelation. That's our real message. I would say Joseph Smith would be very happy to read this, because for the first 10 years, you could join the Mormon Church without ever hearing the name of Joseph Smith. The first great tract, Voice of One, read 1837, doesn't mention his name. It was a coming of revelation. What Joseph wanted was not that you believe in him by reading the book of Mormon, but you would find God, Christ, through reading the book of Mormon. And that's really what we've got to get back to, get away from all this history.
So how have we come to the follow the prophet propaganda that's taught from age 3 on?
The follow of the prophet.
Follow the prophet propaganda.
Well, I think it's a tricky doctrine. I think it's better to just subdue that.
Don't live in Utah.
The people that wrote that song live in North Provo.
No.
So just to kind of roughly frame where some people go with this, and I can understand that. So either historical issues or not feeling like they find Christ currently in the church because of what they feel, how women are presented and treated, or because of LGBT issues in the policy. They say, well, I don't understand how these people can be inspired and prophets when they put out a policy like that, or when, you know, 3 years ago they finally thought it was okay if women pray in confidence. So, I mean, these are things that I can appreciate why people struggle. It's not historical issues, it's current issues, we were taught that they should be receiving revelation, and then we have the Blackson priesthood, we have all these other things that keep happening that indicate that, well, maybe they aren't maybe inspired. So how do you respond? Claudia, how do you respond to that when people feel that way and are struggling?
I think everything evolves. I think that we all have to suffer. Lots of things we shouldn't have to suffer. And that if we hang on, that things will work out. I do believe we have seen tremendous amounts of revolution in the church. Surely it should have happened sooner, but on the other hand, we can appreciate it more because it has happened. We have seen things happen. We'll see more. How it's going to go exactly, I don't know. I think we have to be good citizens and let everybody know how we feel about things and stretch the envelope whenever we can.
And allow them patience.
Can you speak up?
Yeah, we can hear that.
Can you say that one more time a little bit? Real quick, I guess somebody couldn't hear you.
Love and patience. Love.
Evolution.
Evolution,
Yeah, it evolves.
I mean, one of the things I'm always repeatedly asked by bishops is, how are we going to get more girls on the stand? You know, that is not I'm not really criticizing, but the situation is, our boys are well known in our boards, our girls are not. And it's, how are we going to get those girls on the stand? So my best idea is that we should have a crack singing group. And they say, oh, our girls can't sing. I say, okay, let's add the teachers. Well, the teachers aren't very good singers either. Okay, let's add the mothers. Let's get the girls on the stand. And my bishop, to his credit, gave the whole Christmas program to the young women in our board. They did the whole thing. And, you know, that's not enough. But where we see problems, I think we try and see what we could do in some small way that might make a difference. And I think that's actually a great opportunity for us. If everything was as we want it to be, it wouldn't be nearly as interesting. And I just think it's got to be a struggle. It's got to be working.
I'll make some habits.
Just to follow up what you were all just saying and a couple of comments you both made, and I agree with you, Claudia, that when people say, what's the one way you would describe Mormonism, Maxine, I would say, we believe that God is real and God is involved in our lives and we can receive revelation. That's the message of Joseph Smith. But you both articulated this central tension in a way that we're evolving, and there's continuing revelation, which is our wonderful theological loophole. Thank God for continuing revelation. But also there's that issue of what the tension of between that and excavating our past, and the whole reason for the Joseph Smith papers, and all of us historians who drive ourselves crazy doing history, you know, this tension between what do we want to hang on to, and what do we want to let go of, and what, you know, because there's a lot of that right now in terms of looking at the past and sifting through and looking at what are the plain and precious truths and the inspired aspects of the restoration, and then what are the things we'd love to really jettison and get rid of. Like Jana Reese says, like cleaning your house, you know, getting rid of all the stuff that you really don't need anymore. So there's that, can you address that tension of we're evolving and revelation is continuing, but there's a lot of really good stuff there. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is a little bit of what happened with the Community of Christ, although they've held on to the common consent and other things in a way. They've preserved an aspect of our tradition that our cousins, our religious cousins needed to do, and we need each other. Community of Christ and the LDS Church need each other. We've preserved different aspects of the restoration. But can you speak a little bit to that tension of what we want to, in our evolution, what do we want to hang on to and what do we want to get rid of?
Do you want to talk? I will just say one thing. Let's see now. There's one generality I would make, and that is, I would rather live in a lone and dreary world than in the Garden of Eden. You know, it's just a more real place, more things are going on here. You meet working with different people and things like that. And then as for throwing things out, my own feeling is, well, I've preached on this from time to time, is, you know, we have too many commandments. You've been in one of these Sunday school classes where let's list all the things Mormons have to do. Okay, second column. Like that.
Yes, thank you.
Everybody's been in that. Well, you know, it's a housewife's analogy, but like the ingredients on the side of a box of prepared foods, the first one is the most. I say, let's take the top and get rid of all the.
Yay.
And we can go with love the Lord, love your neighbor.
Right.
And just period, that's it.
And write your
So
journal.
Just listen to the sacrament prayers, seriously, and live by those. That's enough. We don't have to make all this list of things we should do. Just do the top, the most important.
Gina, you have a question?
I do. When you say evolution, I'm trying to understand what you mean. Do you mean that we just relax and let whatever is going to happen, or do you suggest that we have some agency in creating that evolution?
We do have a great deal of agency in creating the evolution, but we can't do it on the top. You can do anything you want in your ward if you work with the people. You can do all kinds of things. And you can write. The greatest power that you have, that people that have no power, is the power to write. If you write something, get it published, circulates a little, people listen to it, it makes changes. So that's why writing is my big thing. I mean, it's the thing that people who have no power and no money, they can write. So what is it you have in mind?
Or podcasts. That counts.
Well, no, I want to know, in the evolution, is part of that conversation saying no? Is it part of that transaction that we have with the church to say, actually, no, I won't do that. You can't co-opt me into this particular thing.
But if you don't play the game, if you're not cooperative, you don't get luck. It's a give and take. You've got to be right there. You've got to go clean the church. You've got to go talk when they ask you to talk. And then when you ask for something, you're more likely to get it. I just think you got to be a member.
Be a citizen.
Just back there.
I'm Camille Bailey Agard, and I want to acknowledge the influence that you, Claudia, have had on me. I have a quote, and unfortunately my phone is dead, or I would give it verbatim. It's from you, when you were asked why you pursued your PhD, I believe when your children were still young. Is that accurate? And you said that, you know, housekeeping was like compelling to a point, but that you didn't want to define your life by it. And I had this moment of, I think it was 2 years ago, I was Relief Society president, and we live in Utah County in the epicenter of wealthy LDS conservatism.
Heaven, right?
And I had just paid, he doesn't know this, but I had just paid for my Christmas tree to be decorated. And I just started looking at it in like utter horror. And thought, I gotta go get that Claudia Bushman quote. And I just took the LSAT on Monday. So I'm 45, I'm trying to go to law school. I haven't even, like, I don't even read, I have no attention to detail, but I'm trying, and you have inspired me. Oh, but I do have a question. And hopefully I've reached a point where I don't care what people think, but of course I do sort of still care what people think. When I leave, and there will be caretakers at home, but did you care at all? Like, did you care even yourself? When my 13-year-old inevitably, and he turns 14 this September, and he's been sneaking out of the house, and when everything goes sort of haywire, and I'm not like at the crossroads, did you have to grapple with that at all as a mother, independent of what other people were saying?
Well, it was a very hard thing. I mean, it was very hard in lots of ways. And I mean, I didn't do it lightly. I went back to school because I was a housewife with no status, no position, nothing, no sense of progress of any kind. My husband off meeting interesting new people, a whole new life, had nothing to say to me, I had nothing to say to him. I mean, it was really a painful situation. But so I decided I want to go back to school. So I'd have something to think about when I did my household chores. I would get a job. It just was not the thing to do. I mean, I had these little kids. But when we started, I gave up 3 things purposely when I started going back to school. I gave up fashion. I gave up creative housekeeping. And I gave up, I think I said I gave up social life or something. But the thing is, you can't ever really give them up. But what you can do is think about them in a new way. Okay, I'm not going to do a lot of entertaining. As soon as I have to do some, I'm going to do 2 parties back to back. Same name, same. Okay, I'm not going to sew anything except I have to make Easter dresses for little girls. But I'll make them simple out of material I already have. So it was a matter of simplification that made it most the easiest. And Richard, I mean, these were different times. He said he would not complain if the house was not tidy.
So to follow up on the question, do you ever have angst and concern about how your children are going to turn out and decisions they might make?
But they were better off than they were. You know, I also, my view of the situation was that I was always there. There I was always around. Their view is I was always sitting in the corner reading the book. But they did.
Claudia, could you quickly, I don't know if you can do it quickly, but you told the story about, starting Exponent 2 and coming up against, and this is in answer to the question too, so we are evolving. There's a huge, there are people of all different ilks and ideas within the church, and it's going to evolve. And for those of us who want to help support the current beautiful structure that brings so much good to people's lives, and to help it move forward to bring more good to people's lives. I remember you talking about when you back off and start on a different project, come at it from a different angle in order to support, to support the organization in a way that honors and respects the organization, but to also continue to help the cause of women, for instance.
So you're talking about when I resigned from
Yes.
Exponent 2?
Yes, and when you had interactions with a couple of.
Well, it's been very interesting that this little thing we started in people's living rooms and laid out on the floor, and it has now become important. It was quoted several times yesterday at one of the histories. Amazing. I mean, it was just absolutely a little thing we did on our own. Because we were housewives, we were talking about being Mormons, and we decided we did a lot of projects. We used to have an Exponent Day dinner. We used to have Juanita Brooks came out and talked to us and so on. But then we started this little newspaper, Exponent 2, and the person that was, we had already done an issue of dialogue, the pink issue of dialogue. We had already done something that's covered on. But with that, I came home from one of these events and said, Richard, everything we've done is just turn to gold. What can you do now? And Richard said, start a newspaper. So it was his idea. And we actually had a person who had been a newspaper reporter to be the editor, Stephanie Smith-Goodson. But she was also president of the Relief Society, and when she told the bishop she wanted to be released, he wouldn't release her. And so one of the people at one of these meetings turned to me and said, well, you'll just have to be the editor. That is how I came to be the editor of Exponent. Because there were people that could do all kinds of things, but they couldn't always do it. So, and we published, it was a glorious time. I don't know how many of you are old enough to even remember, but suddenly, we little housewives were important. We were significant. People wanted to interview us. People sent us money. They sent us letters. We cried. And but along the time, there was a fly in the ointment, which is that Richard was state president.
It was a
and
flaw.
so there were those people who began to think that it was not a suitable thing that the wife of the state president should be edited. Questionable publication. Although there was nobody could ever find anything wrong with it. They just think, well, it might get out of hand. So 2 members of the Quorum of the Dead came to visit us and spoke to us. It was really quite remarkable. And, but they said, well, the first one, which was Robert Hale, said, this continued between us. No good can come. No good. You're just going to be in terrible trouble. But then after, so we've got to close it down. So I took that to a meeting and said, Elder Hale says we have to close them. But they did not want to close them. And what they decided to do was write long letters to the brethren, particularly the present Hales, Elder Hales, and say how much being involved in this paper had meant to them. Because it really was a very rich experience for all of us, working together, doing hard things, expanding in different ways. So they wrote all these letters. I already knew that I was out, because I'm just not going to be the person that gets my husband fired as the state president. Anyway, so they wrote these letters. I didn't write them. And they went to Salt Lake, and Hales took them to Tom Perry, who had been our state president, but was no longer. Now he was in Salt Lake. And Hales said to Perry, I think these women deserve a response. So Elder Perry got on the plane, flew out to Boston and met them. I mean, that was really response. I mean, nobody gets that kind of response. And so Elder Perry said, that I've seen nothing wrong with this. This looks wonderful. I'm sure it's good. But the wife of the state president cannot be. So I retired at that point, but it's carried on. It's now over 40 years old. And if you're interested in women's stuff, you ought to get hold of the Explain to read it.
Talk to me on the poetry at Dirt. If anybody wants, you know.
Yeah, it's a great thing. It's a great thing for all the women involved. It builds their talents and gives them interesting things to do, builds friendships like nothing else. One of the things I wrote in the first editorial was that Exponent 2 is poised on the dual platforms of Mormonism and Mormonism, and that these are compatible. We aim to prove by our pages and our lives. That just came out of my mind. I just had some sense. But I do have to say that over the years they decided that they were as poised on the platform of Mormonism and all that. And so they changed it to they have to have a connection to Mormonism rather than belief. Anyway, it was a great time, and actually, you know, it's wonderful that I have writings about it because we read that into right.
I'm sorry to ask a second question again, but I would not forgive myself if I didn't ask this question. I'm sure I'm not the only one who has this question in this room. This question is for Richard. So I think one could plausibly make the argument that you know more about Joseph Smith than anyone else. And I would be curious to know, and probably others in this room too, what your opinion is of Joseph Smith as a man and Joseph Smith as a prophet.
Well, your assumption is wrong. I don't know more about Joseph Smith. I've just written more. Dean Jesse and Ron Esselman and a lot of those people with Joseph Smith really know everything. So the book was dedicated to them. I respect their immense knowledge. So what do I think of as a man?
And the prophet.
There were times when I thought I liked him as a prophet, but not as a man, because I discovered he had this temper, and I don't like people who are hurt by force, anger, and he would snap fiercely. I reconciled myself to that by realizing he wasn't just a sullen, ill-tempered person. He was a man of feelings who wore his feelings on his sleeve. And he would get angry very fast, but then he'd switch and he'd fill with love. So that passage in 121 about moving time the sharpness when moved upon by the Holy Ghost, and then showing forth afterwards an increase of love in whom that's the esteem to be thine enemy. That's Joseph Smith's character. So, and I came to his fecund imagination, his divine imagination, just the revelation of the revelation going on in all sorts of directions. I admire that immensely, and I admire his resolve. Nothing discouraged him. People turned away and turned against him. He just trotted on. So he just had this vision of what had to be done. He just did it with absolute resolve. So as a person, I think he's magnificent. I do believe he was a prophet. I believe in the gold plates. I believe in the witnesses. I think all the arguments against the witnesses are ill-founded. I think those testimonies have to be taken very seriously as historical evidence. After all, sign up. Well, okay. All right.
That's an important point.
I will say on the female side that Emma's view of Joseph, she never lost faith in him as a prophet. She didn't think he could write the book of Mormon, and she knew him better. So I believe he did have Egyptian characters. I've taken those characters from there. I've drafted two of Egyptologists. Was confirmed with their Egyptian characters. And I believe the Book of Mormon is beyond explanation by historical means. I don't think there is an explanation of the start history you can hold for.
That's realistic.
It's really, it really is I say it's a work of genius or a work of inspiration. But the definition of work of genius is a work that goes beyond human capacities. It's an extra powerful thing, which is very close to inspiration. So all along the line, I think he's a wonderful man. I'm not going to say in the name of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
I know what you believe.
I believe. I believe in the church. I believe everything about it is good. Do I worry about the plates? I guess I don't. I worry more that you should write about your experience. And I think this is a great thing for you to do. You listen to Richard tonight. These are all people that are thinking and striving about all this. Go home and put in 3 or 4 paragraphs what you actually think. You don't know what you actually think until you have to write it down. You will write down what you think. You will have a document that has some meaning to you. So, and I'm going to make my closing statement while I've got the floor, which is that I really think you ought to take seriously what I say about putting pen to paper or fingers to the computer. And I give you 5 options, 5 things that you could do that would be very beneficial in this. Okay, we're about halfway through June. Try and keep a daily journal until June is over. Just try and do it for those 2 weeks. And then if it goes okay, see if you can continue for another. Item 2, many of you are young enough that your fathers and mothers are still alive. Go record somebody's story. Get it down before they're gone. One thing I did as a project was to do oral histories with my 3 sisters and then transcribe them all and give them to each of the sisters for a Christmas present one year. Everybody stayed up all night reading that thing, discovering things about each other they had never known. All new information. So, oral histories. Try and do one. Try and do something. You'll feel glad. Number 3, think about the first thing you remember in your life. What is your first memory? Try and remember it in as much detail as you can and write it down. Why was this? Why do you remember this thing? What is the significance of it? That kind of thing. Try and write that. That's the beginning of your autobiography. And when you start that out, you'll have that. But again, if you do no more than one of these things, it will be trivial. Let's see, what was the 4th one? That's the 5th. Maybe but the 5th one is to write your obituary. All of us read the obituary from time to time. Find one you really like, use it as a model, and write out your own. Put it in a file with a good picture of yourself. And a few suggestions of what you'd like at your funeral. Put it in place where, tell people where it is so that they'll find it. Get your parents to do that if you get enough. And then every year on your birthday, you revise it because things change in your life. But if you have an obituary that you write, I can tell you horror stories about obituary. My very own great-grandmother, my own grandmother, was not mentioned in the obituary of her mother. If somebody else was doing it fast and just left it out. Terrible family split and so on. Never forget it. So anyway, those questions. So how many, is anybody going to try and do one of those things? Raise your hand. That's what I like to say. That's what I like to say. You won't be sorry. You always congratulate. Okay, that's my final.
Thank you. And just to emphasize what she's saying, we are living in a transformative time for the church. 50 years from now, they're going to be researching history to try to write about why and how the church changed to what it's becoming. And that'll be up to you guys writing these stories. That's probably why she's so hard. Richard, do you have a final statement?
No, I'm in.
Can you elaborate anything more on the quote you gave Peggy about Elder Packer, his relationship with you, and giving you a blessing when you were doing Redstone Rolling?
I've known Elder Packer because he was mission president in Lincoln when I was there. And I'd gone to him for some personal advice. So I sort of knew him. And, we all had stresses and strains in Elder Packer. But he really was a spiritual man. He visited us when we were state president, gave us some gorgeous advice about how to handle the kids. Because he sensed we were having trouble with the children, which we were, and so were my kids. So I felt like he was a man of depth. So I really did want his blessing. And he did give me one quite generously. I'm sure he was disappointed when he received the book. It is not the book he wanted. He wanted a book like Farrar's Biography of Christ. He actually actually that book saying, like this kind of thing. I wanted to be open with him so that when I did my thing, there's nothing hidden. I'm just going to say, this is what I did.
It was a beautiful quote. I appreciate it. I wanted to hear more about that. So.
Thank you so much, Mark. Well, for those of you who are here for the first time, I know what you didn't see. This is typical of what we have here. Amazing people, sharing their experiences, hopefully in ways that will help us find ways to navigate our own experiences and challenges. Thank you very much for your lives and your work, and for sharing your generously your time and personal experiences with us and your work with us. Thank you. We're going to close with, what number is it?
254.
254.
Is that the hymn you requested?
It is, but it's so long. Let's just do Praise God from whom all blessings flow.
I like how you just.
So if you
What's
praise
the page
God.
number? Don't confuse us. What are we doing? Praise God from whom all blessings.
That's a nice old Protestant hymn, is that? Praise. 242. 42 or 242? Do we have piano? Or do I throw out the, I'll throw out the first page. Okay. Let's do it.
All downloading at the same time.
I have one verse to that song. Okay, one verse. Okay. Here we go. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above, ye heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost.
Our Father in heaven, we're indeed grateful this night for the sharing that has gone on, for the challenges that have been made. And may we accept these and honor them and do them. And Father, we pray for thy spirit that has been here. Will go with us, give us courage and the challenges that we face. We thank for all the people that have done so much to make this possible. We especially thank Claudia and Richard this night for what they're giving us. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.
If you would help take your chair down on the patio.